And you've been consistent. I mean, you've been speaking about key issues like immigration for a long time, and new data shows record-breaking migration figures. Just yesterday, the Institute of Public Affairs found that net permanent and long-term arrivals totalled almost 500,000 in 12 months to January this year, making it the highest in recorded history. Yet we know what Australians want. Polls consistently show that the majority of Australians support slashing migration. So we're being ignored. I think many Australians feel that way. And what do the consequences look like?
Dire consequences for the majority of Australians out there. As we've seen, to get housing is near impossible. The rents are increasing dramatically. The prices of houses putting out of the reach of a lot of Australians. And this government is so arrogant. They really are. They know how the people feel. They know what they're going through, and yet they keep opening up the floodgates. And it's estimated 1,800 a day are coming to the country. Now, we can't keep going at the rate. Something's going to break. And the government is only bringing them in just to prop up their lack of being able to control the economy. And it's just pouring more people into the country. I fear for Australians, I really do. And that's why they're turning to One Nation.
Yeah, it's interesting. Australians are set for some more economic pain. We've got the fuel crisis, we've got inflation set to go up, another rate hike. Just why people are turning to One Nation. I would also argue that Australians really were all so heartbroken by what happened in December at Bondi Beach, where we had 15 Australians lose their lives by an alleged ISIS-inspired terror duo. Do you think that woke a lot of Australians up as to the threat of radical Islam, something you've been speaking out about so strongly?
Australia's National Cabinet does not convene emergency meetings over things that are going well. Let that sink in for a moment. The Prime Minister, every state premier, and every territory chief minister, all in the same room, all focused on the same problem. And that problem is that this country is running dangerously low on fuel, while petrol prices shatter records at the Bowser. And somewhere in the middle of all that emergency coordination, Shadow Energy Minister Dan Tehan stepped in front of a Sky News camera and said what a growing number of Australians are already thinking: Chris Bowen failed. If you want the unfiltered version of what is happening in Australian politics right now, subscribe to The Australian Mind and hit that notifications bell. We do not soften the edges. Let us set the scene before we get into the fireworks. The National Cabinet Crisis meeting was itself a dramatic admission. For days, the Albanese government insisted there was no fuel supply issue. Prices were rising, pumps were running dry in parts of the country, and the official government line was essentially "nothing to see here, move along." Then, within the space of roughly 72 hours, the Prime Minister convened a full National Cabinet emergency session. The speed of that reversal told Australians everything the press conferences did not. When governments go from no problem to emergency National Cabinet in 3 days, the problem was never small. The trigger is the US-Iran conflict and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which a substantial portion of the world's oil supply flows. When that passage tightens, global energy markets feel it immediately. Australia, which imports around 90% of its transport fuel, is about as exposed to that kind of shock as any developed nation on the planet. The country currently holds approximately 37 days of petrol and around 30 days of diesel. The International Energy Agency standard is 90 days. Australia is not close. It has not been close since 2012. 13 years of successive governments nodding at that gap and doing precisely nothing meaningful to close it. But here is where Dan Tehan landed the sharpest blow of the week, and it was sharp. Standing before Sky News, Tehan called directly for the appointment of a fuel czar to lead Australia's crisis response, not a committee, not a task force review, not another Canberra bureaucrat filing reports into a folder that sits on a ministerial desk for 6 months, a single, empowered, accountable individual with the authority and the logistics credentials to actually fix the problem. Tehan had previously floated someone in the mould of Lieutenant General John Freeman, the man who coordinated Australia's entire COVID vaccine rollout, as the calibre of appointment the moment demands, a no-nonsense operator who can cut through bureaucratic layers, coordinate across state and federal lines, and get fuel moving. Instead, as we covered recently on this channel, the government appointed Anthea Harris, the inaugural chair of the Climate Change Authority and one of Australia's most prominent architects of carbon pricing policy. Tehan's Bowen failed assessment was not delivered in isolation. It was the conclusion of a specific argument that the Energy Minister's policy settings, particularly the safeguard mechanism and the broader regulatory burden placed on fuel refining and storage, have left Australia structurally underprepared for exactly this kind of global shock. The safeguard mechanism is the government's primary emissions reduction vehicle for industrial facilities. Critics in the energy sector argue it layers compliance costs onto the very companies responsible for producing and refining fuel, costs that, over time, have contributed to Australia's already thin domestic refining capacity. Remember, the country now operates exactly 2 oil refineries. In 2000, there were 8. The remaining 2 are doing the work of an entire continent's fuel supply chain, and the policy environment surrounding them has not exactly been designed with energy security as the top priority. Tehan's demand for a fuel czar is, at its core, a demand for a different kind of leadership response, one that treats this crisis as the national security emergency it plainly is, rather than a communications management exercise. The National Cabinet meeting was a step in the right direction. The question Australians are asking is whether the coordination happening in that room matches the scale of the structural problem underneath it. 37 days of petrol, 30 days of diesel, 90% import dependence, 2 refineries, and an energy minister the opposition has now publicly declared failed on the biggest test of his tenure. The fuel czar proposal is on the table. Whether the government picks it up is the next question worth watching. Thanks so much for watching. Your support means everything to us.